Hello and welcome. And thank you for joining us today for our first Hopkins at Home discussion on how the arts and aesthetic experiences measurably change the brain, body, and behavior. This is the first time that we are having this discussion at Hopkins at Home, and we're really excited to be able to be here today. To begin our discussion, our panelists decided that we thought it would be very important to really walk our talk, or better yet, breathe our talk. And so I'd like to invite Renée Fleming to lead us in a breathing exercise to illustrate the power of the arts and aesthetics.
Hello, everyone. So let's just start by rolling your shoulders. We're going to try and get physically, take a break from whatever you've been doing and have focus and readiness for what we're about to discuss. Now take a deep breath. Take a large breath, as much as you can. Put your hands on your rib cage and try to feel expansion into your hands as opposed to lifting your shoulders. Keep your shoulders relaxed. And 1, 2, 3, taking a deep breath. And then exhale. Now we're going to do that a couple more times. I'm going to count to 5 for each inhale. So you can really focus on taking a longer breath. None of us use nearly enough of our breathing capacity, and we should. It'll help us it'll oxygenate, obviously, the brain and the rest of the body, but it also will help you feel a little bit less anxious throughout the day. So here we go. 1, take a deep breath and counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And again, this time we're going to hold the breath for 3 counts. Inhale, hold, 2, 3, and exhale. 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, so there are a lot of other breathing exercises we can do. Panting is a good one. Just things to kind of wake up the body. But start with one last thing, a head roll, a nice head roll all the way around. Be careful as you put your head back. It's not as good anymore, but focus on lengthening the back of your neck as you roll your head forward. Okay, terrific. Wonderful. We're ready to start.
Wonderful. Thank you, Renée. And just doing that every day makes a huge difference in building lung capacity. During COVID, Renée started something called Healing Breath, which allowed many millions of people around the world to do those kinds of exercise. And hopefully she'll share a little bit more about that in a few moments. So my name is Susan Magsamen, and I am the founder and executive director of the International Arts and Mind Lab, Center of Applied Neuroaesthetics in the School of Medicine at Johns Hopkins. And we are really proud to be part of the Pedersen Brain Science Institute, where the Pedersen family has really made a commitment to helping us understand how the arts really change our brains and bodies. I'm also the co-director of the NeuroArts Blueprint and the co-author of a book called Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us, with my co-author, Ivy Ross, who is the Vice President of Design for Google Hardware. So today, it's a pleasure to really host this discussion where over the next hour, my colleagues and I will talk about this emerging field of neuroarts or neuroaesthetics and how the arts can improve our physical health, our mental health, learning, and well-being at an individual level, but also at a community level. So we will spend some time talking about some of the work that we've been doing around the world over the last several years. And then at the end of about 12:45, we'll open it up for questions. So we encourage you to share your questions on the Hopkins at Home chat. And we're really looking forward to hearing what you're thinking about as well. So today I am joined with 2 incredible pioneers in the field, Renée Fleming and Nina Kraus. And I'm delighted to introduce both of them to you. Renée Fleming, as you know, is one of the most highly acclaimed singers of our time. She's performed on stages all over the world in opera houses and concert halls. She's honored with 5 Grammy Awards and is a National Medal of Arts at Kennedy Center Honors in the fall of 2023. And she has many honorary doctorates at 8 leading universities, and has sung at the Super Bowl, to the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, and many, many other honors. She also is a leading voice as an advocate for the research at the intersection of arts, health, and neuroscience. And she'll share a bit more about that with you, but she is one of the founding members of a collaboration between the Kennedy Center of Performing Arts and the National Institutes of Health. She also is the co-chair of the NeuroArts Blueprint, and she is also a presenter of a program called Music and Mind that has now been shared in over 50 cities. And she serves as the Goodwill Ambassador for the Arts and Health for the World Health Organization. Nina Kraus is a scientist, inventor, and amateur musician who studies the biology of auditory learning in her role as the professor of neurobiology and otolaryngology, and is the Hugh Knowles Chair for Hearing Science at Northwestern University. And her examination of sound in the brain, Nina has done some really groundbreaking work in understanding the far-reaching impact of sound and showing how hearing engages how we think, how we feel, how we move, and how we combine our senses. So it's through this auditory neuroscience, she's discovered that sound across the lifespan has major neurological impact on our health for musicians, but also for language disorders, autism, developmental disabilities, concussions, and many other areas. She's also an award-winning author of a book called Of Sound Mind, which I think she'll share a bit more with you today. So it's a great honor to welcome both Nina and Renée. I'd like to take just a moment to level set before we open up the conversation to both Renée and Nina. And if you could pull up the slides. The first slide that I want to just share is a little bit about definition. So neuroaesthetics or neuroarts is the science of how the arts and aesthetic experiences measurably change our brains and bodies, and how when we understand this, it can be translated into practice in health, public health, mental health, learning, community, flourishing, all the things that we really, really care about and understand in terms of being what it means to be human. And it's only been in the last 25 years as technology has allowed us to non-invasively get inside our heads that we really have begun to understand the neurophysiology and the biology of how the arts change us physically, emotionally, and mentally. Next slide. So just to give you a little bit of context, we bring the world in through our senses, and we now know that we have over 100 billion neurons that we are born with. And it's through these synaptic connections that happen through salient experiences that we create strong neural pathways and connect the different parts of our brains and build strong resiliency and strong neural pathways. And so we now know that the arts and aesthetic experiences are some of the most salient experiences that we have, and to be able to use those in these different domains is really wisdom. I was able to meet with E.O. Wilson, the evolutionary biologist from Harvard, who shared that without humans' ability to make art and to have creative expression, we would not have evolved to the species that we are. Next slide. So this is just I think, a gorgeous image by Greg Dunn that really illustrates the way that sensory systems connect to our oldest part of the brain, which is the brain stem, and into the spinal cord, and how different parts of music and the arts literally connect different parts of our brains simultaneously and help to activate different parts of our brains, whether we're working on the prefrontal cortex or thinking about the cerebellum. And the arts are one of the only ways that I know that actually connect multiple systems simultaneously, whether that's in the brain or the body. And so the arts and aesthetics hold enormous power to really affect our health and well-being. Next slide. And just to define what I mean by arts, we define arts as creative self-expression. And there are arts that are being defined and redefined and invented all of the time. So you might be thinking about poetry or architecture or digital arts, but also think about gardening. And from an aesthetic experience point of view, think about humming and doodling and all of those things that we do that we may not think of as creative self-expression. But these are all these acts that help to activate these different parts of the brain and these different systems that we'll talk about a little bit later. Next slide. So when I talk about this work, people always say, well, what art is the best art? And the reality is, for me, the arts are like the elephant in the room. You cannot undervalue how powerful and ancient and incredibly ubiquitous the arts are. They're everywhere, everywhere. But it depends on what part of the elephant you're touching, you're going to get something different. So if you're touching the arts for child development, you may be looking at sensory stimulation and different kinds of art forms that build strong neural connections and strong neural pathways that build social emotional connection. If you're looking at the arts for Parkinson's, you may be looking at dance, where gait and rhythm and cognition and sleep are improved through dance. If you're looking at the arts for Alzheimer's, you might be looking at autobiographical music and singing and recalling information and songs and opening up memories that have not been able to be accessed through traditional channels because of dementia. In learning, if you're looking at learning, it may be that music is something that you're looking at because we know that myelination is stronger. And myelination is that covering around the neural pathways that protects the electrical signals. If you're playing music with someone else and you're learning to really be able to build those strong connections. So this is a vast and powerful field that's really emerging as what we like to think of as mainstream as we move over the next several years. Next slide. So we talked just briefly, as I shared, I'm part of the International Arts and Mind Lab, and our mission is to amplify human potential through the arts and aesthetic experiences. So all of the things that we're talking about today, I think really fall under that sort of mission and value statement. And we're very interested in translating this work into practice. Next slide. And just to show that we work in research, we work in field leadership, in community building, and also outreach and education. In the summer, we'll be offering our first undergraduate course in neuroaesthetics, and we're super excited about that. Next slide. So I mentioned that this is a field that's building, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but the NeuroArts Blueprint is something that the lab is partnering with the Aspen Institute with, and the idea is to ensure that a field is created like bioethics, women's health, climate change, where the arts in all of their form become part of mainstream medicine, public health, and I'll also add education. Next slide. And there are 5 recommendations that the Blueprint has really put out, and that includes strengthening research, honoring and supporting the many practices that are using the arts, and that's from neurology to public health to education and more, expanding and enriching educational and career pathways, advocating for more funding and policy, and then finally building capacity, leadership, and communication strategies. Next slide. And so one of the things that we're building, we'll talk about this a little later, is a NeuroArts resource center that allows people to literally have access to all of this knowledge all over the world. Next slide. And as part of that communications, our book, Your Brain on Art, that Ivy and I wrote, has really been part of this conversation of how do you share this work with so many people around the world, and how do you begin to create the zeitgeist of arts and aesthetic experiences being a lane like exercise, sleep, nutrition, and we'll talk a bit more about that as well. Next slide. And finally, I'd like to make this statement that we are standing on the verge of a cultural shift in which the arts can deliver potent, accessible, and proven health and well-being and learning solutions to billions of people. So let's take the slide down and turn to Renée Fleming. Renée, you have been at the front of this for so long in really generating the enthusiasm and the interest nationally and around the world. And I'd love for you to share a bit about your perspective on why this is so important and some of the work that you've been doing.
Well, I came to this, well, a long time ago, really, as a singer, because I had a tremendous amount of pain in advance of high pressure performances. And I also had bouts of crippling stage fright. And I became very interested in the mind body connection as a result, trying to understand and unpack what was so difficult about performing. And of course, it's built into the word performance. So I met Francis Collins at a dinner party 7 years ago, and he was then director of the National Institutes of Health. And I had just started as a consultant at the Kennedy Center, and I asked if we could perhaps provide a platform for science, because I was noticing that neuroscientists in particular and researchers were studying the brain and music. So this has been an incredible journey. I've become only more and more passionate about it. I met Nina Kraus actually early on in this endeavor, and my job really is to be an advocate, to get the public interested, and to also enlighten the public. As I tour around the world, I present on this, try to give an overview of arts and health, but also invite local researchers and healthcare providers to join me. And it's been a phenomenal learning opportunity for me. So I'm not just going into a hotel room and channel surfing, but I get to do something productive outside of performing. And we mentioned briefly healing breath. So that was an initiative with Google Arts and Culture. And it kind of brought our best practices of breathing exercises. I invited many of my friends to join me. And it was a tremendous amount of fun. But to help people with long COVID, and we noticed that people were having pulmonary issues and are still having pulmonary issues. And I also didn't realize how vast the numbers are of people who are dealing with all kinds of conditions. So I suggest everyone have a look at that. And we have created a white paper as well with Johns Hopkins and with the Dana Foundation to possibly improve what's available in terms of diagnosis, in particular for those with pulmonary issues. So the NIH has really come through with $35 million in funding of research. The research is all online on their website. You could see what's been done. Nina and Susan have both received grants, and it's very exciting what's happening in the field. It's grown exponentially since I first started, when people were skeptical, were referring to this as soft science. And now people have really understood that with integrative medicine, there's a need for this type of research. There's actually, as the head of the NIH said, that there's a moral imperative to see us as whole people and to support who we are as creative beings who have actually, through creativity, found our best collaboration in the history of Homo sapiens. So it's definitely worth continuing and expanding. And it's something that was beginning to kind of go into the background. So I think we have to rethink that. My work with the World Health Organization has been fascinating, because so many countries in the world never siloed off or stopped arts and health because it worked. Our society, which requires a very high level in terms of efficacy for research, it's found it a little bit difficult, more difficult, but with technology and the strides that have been made in technology, we've learned a great deal about how to measure the benefits of arts and health. In fact, I participated myself in an fMRI study where I was in the machine for 2 hours. And so that's online as well. But I'm especially excited because with the NIH and the Foundation for the NIH, a toolkit for standardizing research has been created. And the pillars really are disorders of aging. As I present around the country and around the world, I would say the number one anxiety is around dementia and Alzheimer's disease. But other disorders like Parkinson's and movement disorders are equally concerning. And so there's been very positive research around these types of disorders. Childhood development is a major pillar. Engaging your child or your grandchild with arts in an active setting is incredibly beneficial for them, whether it's playing an instrument or dance or ideally doing everything together. It's very beneficial for the brain, and the brain will change in just 2 years of this type of study. And I would say mental health is a huge concern as well. And pain, there's tremendous research around the benefits of arts and health for pain relief, certainly for anxiety and depression. And these are all powerful, I would say, drivers in terms of what it is that we want to try and achieve with any healthcare. So this is one of the reasons why I think there's so much interest now. The NeuroArts Investigator Awards have just been announced with my foundation and the NeuroArts Blueprint and the Aspen Institute. So we've invited young scientists to pair with artists in this collaborative type of research to continue to build on the benefits that we're finding and create a pipeline for the future. And I would also say that I'm so proud to be connected to the NeuroArts Blueprint because it's by far the most ambitious plan I've seen. It seeks to create a completely new field. Climate was not a field 25 years ago. And of course, now it certainly is. And we're really working hard to do the same for NeuroArts. And it's very innovative and extremely well thought out. And I'm a huge fan of Susan Magsamen and Bruce Katz for doing this. And then finally, I have a book coming out on April 9th called Music in Mind, Harnessing the Arts for Health and Wellness. And it's an anthology with 41 chapters from all across the field. It's really meant to be present the broad scope of this work. So there are chapters from Susan and Nina, but also Francis Collins, Dan Levitin, who wrote This Is Your Brain on Music, which was probably the first major bestseller about this. Robert Zatorri, Ani Patel, Yo-Yo Ma, Anna DeVere Smith, Richard Powers, writers, and including my friend Ann Patchett. And so it's a kind of book that you could pick up and read something that interests you. A whole section on arts education, for instance, on so many of these different aspects of arts and health. And it's Viking Penguin and Random House are now one conglomerate, and they are actually publishing the book. And it's available now for pre-order where anywhere books are sold. I think that's all I need to talk about at the moment. So you can tell I'm pretty excited about this. When I talk about it, I speak faster and my voice goes up. But I will say this, I'm going to make one little push for singing because singing stimulates the vagus nerve. And we know that is a really positive thing. It's one of the best ways to do it. So it doesn't cost anything. You could do it in the car, do it at home, obviously do it in the shower. So I highly recommend singing.
And Renee hates when I say this, but you don't have to be a good singer. And I'm not a good singer, although she says I could be, to have incredible value in singing. And I do what she says. I sing all the time and at the chagrin of most of the people around me, but it's so joyful and it's so good for you. And it's just an extraordinary, immediate, affordable, accessible way to continue to really grow our health. And, choirs and choruses have always shown that it's such a great connector as well. So thank you, Renee. Thank you for sharing that. And I know we'll come back and talk a little bit more. I have an advanced copy of Renee's book, and it is this thick. And it is like diving into Alice in Wonderland, where every character, every person that's written something takes you to a new place. It's truly an adventure, and I couldn't recommend it more highly. It's by my bedside, and every night I try to read a chapter or as much as I can. And the voices and the stories and the research will really blow your mind. So thank you, Renee. It's a gift. It's really a gift.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Nina, you are a phenom. You are an extraordinary researcher who has been really, I think, leading the way in helping us understand sound and music. And folks on the call may not know that music is the most studied form of art at this point. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about the neurobiology of sound and how we can learn from you about what we know and how we can apply that in our lives.
Oh, thank you, Susan. Well, I would love to talk with you and with anyone who's listening about this topic, which is so fascinating. On the one hand, we have signals, we have molecules, we have waves moving in the air, and then we have neural signals that are making sense of all of this biologically. And then there is aesthetics and transcendence. So we have it all, from waves to wonder. And I see you have my slide from our website up, and I want you to see that sound pretty much touches everything that we care about. Music and head injury, various language and reading disorders, development, aging. So it's a very powerful force in our lives. And when I wrote of Sound Mind, I tried to put all this information in one place. And perhaps you can bring up that slide. And it is a book that, I've written many scientific articles, and yet I've realized my favorite audience is, and MIT Press kept asking me, who's your target audience? And the best I could come up with was Hermione Granger. Someone who is interested in the powerful forces in our world. And the book is conversationally written, but it is also a great shock to my editor. 25% of the book is referenced because I really gave the best science I knew into this book. And it is personal because I have lots of personal stories. Science is done by human beings, and I think that's really important. And as you saw both on the website slide and in the book, there are 80 original illustrations because science is art and art is science. So you don't need more slides at the moment. Let me talk about a couple of the things that we have learned. One of the things is that the hearing brain is vast. And the hearing brain is vast. It engages what we know, who we are, how we think, how we remember, how we move, how we feel, how we combine our other senses. And importantly, as Renée mentioned, our viscera. Have you ever wondered why food tastes a little off when you're in an airplane? Well, people thought it was the dryness in the air, but scientists looked at this and no, it was the sound. It was the sound because, well, who's hungry when there's an avalanche coming? Sound is our evolutionary alarm sense, which is also why we really need to be thinking about the biological impact of sound and unwanted sound and noise in our society. But when we think about this vast sound mind, music is the jackpot. Music engages all of these systems really as well as anything I know. But we're always asked as scientists, well, where in the brain is it happening? Where and how? And as usual, I go to music for my inspiration, and the Beatles said it beautifully. They have a song here, there, and everywhere. And I think that captures what some people might think is a paradox, but I'm completely comfortable with the fact that there are individual places and individual systems, and yet they only work to the extent that they operate as a unit and as a whole. So we are able, in fact, the fourth chapter of my book is called The Quest. And we have measured brain responses from single neurons and all kinds of models. But we really have been trying to figure out what is a good way of measuring the brain's responses in people that can give us meaningful information about the neural arts, for example. And of course, as I'm talking to you now, the neurons in your brain that respond to sound are producing electricity. And if I had electrodes on your head, we would be picking up your brain's response to sound. And importantly, and this is the other big point. So one is, the hearing brain is vast. The other is that we are what we do, which is why what we are doing here and why the NeuroArts Blueprint and all of these initiatives are so important, because we need to make the best choices possible in our lives, the best choices that have been informed by many things. And what I can offer is what we know as scientists, because I'm a biologist. So we are what we do. And we have been measuring the brain's response to speech and to music. Some of the work that is very germane to this is the fact that making music and having a music education is something that will change the brain, not only for music, but if you think of the brain needs to process the ingredients of sound, pitch, timing, timbre, harmonics. The harmonics in sound, for example, that helps us to distinguish one instrument from another instrument. But the harmonics also help us distinguish, did I say bad or dad? So you can see how big this is. We've recently been recording responses to music and to notes. So let me present to you the brain keyboard.
So finally, we have science meets art. Here is the brain keyboard. And we have recorded the brain's response to every note on the keyboard. Can you play a couple notes for us? So this is the brain's response to individual notes. And now you will hear Mark Meadows play the brain. Thank you.
So now, would you please cue up? I'd like you to listen to the brain of a child who has had a music education. And then a child in the same classroom who has not had a music education. So, we have done a lot of research over the lifespan. Some of we've tested responses to music from womb to tomb in various forms with people with various music experience, and we've really learned that making the sound to meaning connections that one needs to make with music makes it so that, I said we are what we do, that you automatically respond and pick up. You have a nervous system that picks up on sound details in ways that help us learn and help us be more effective communicators. Now, another line of work that we have been doing is on head injury and on athletics. We have an NIH grant that supports our work with our Division I athletes at Northwestern University. And, you can imagine making sense of sound is one of the hardest jobs that we ask our brain to do. So if you get hit in the head, that's going to disrupt that process. Now, first of all, let me say that one of the best things that we can do for our physical and psychological health is play sports and be physically active. That said, if you sustain a concussion, it will disrupt the synchrony, the neural synchrony. And so I'd like you to hear a healthy brain. And then here is a brain of someone who has sustained a concussion. So I want to leave you with this very important idea. So on the one hand, we have concussion that is disrupting the neural synchrony, the ability of nerves to fire together. This is very, very, very important to have neural synchrony. And so concussion will disrupt neural synchrony, but music, the rhythm in music, has the potential to resynchronize the brain, to speed healing, to speed return to play, return to learn, through rhythm, through music. So this is an area that we are very keen to develop.
It's fascinating. It's really fascinating to literally hear the difference between with and without music training and what happens to a normal brain when there is a concussion. And I think we don't really understand that. And I guess, Nina, I'd love to open this up to you to ask the question, what are some of the interventions when you have a concussion or a traumatic brain injury that are helpful in repairing a broken brain?
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, because right now, when you go to a sports medicine conference, all of the attention is on vision and on balance. And just as with the neural arts in general, there is a tremendous under-recognition of the hearing brain, which is this vast system, having anything to do with concussion. So whenever one of our studies is picked up on NPR or someplace that the public hears it, I have so many messages from people saying, I had no idea. Mm-hmm. Ever since I had a concussion, I have had difficulty hearing, making sense of sound. And so arguably, and you know, there is evidence, early evidence to show that we certainly already know that the brain has become asynchronous in terms of the neural firing when you make sound to meaning connections. This is something that an athlete does really well. You know, I found myself once on a dance floor at the Concussion Legacy Foundation dinner, and I was dancing with these mountains of men who were so responsive rhythmically to my movements. And so these movements, rhythm is an enormous, untapped yet. You know, I think the research is showing that this is an area we should be going. And I think I really would like to say that as an example of where I would like the field to go is that there are so many areas like this one where music should really be the standard of care for treatment and for monitoring recovery.
And that's a really great point, because when you talk about building a field and you think about what does it mean to make something mainstream in health, learning, and in public health, standard of care, medical students don't learn about the arts and aesthetic experiences. They don't learn the neurophysiology of the arts. So as a collective, it's not a tool in their toolkit because the awareness isn't there, let alone the actual training and practice. So building a field is essential, and building the training is essential for that as well. there's so many questions that I'm going to go ahead and start to maybe seed some of these out and to each of you. And maybe let's try to make this a bit of a dialogue, and we'll see how far we get. But Renée, the first question is from a young opera singer who is working on her master's in opera performance and singing health. And how has your scientific and neurological understanding affected your own singing and training?
Well, it's fascinating because, first of all, there's so much voice science now, which didn't exist when I learned how to sing. When I learned how to sing, it was really a best practices kind of technique. And so right from there, I know so much more about the voice, about any kind of laryngeal tension, anything that comes into play, which we are human beings who are changing every single day. So tongue tension, all of these things can really affect the voice. But what has helped me recently is Susan's book, Your Brain on Art. I recommend that all of you read it because the first chapter just on neuroscience will illuminate so much about what it is that affects us. And so I have enabled myself since then to really enjoy artistic experiences more than I was because I've been working really hard for a number of years now. And it's changed my mental health. It's changed my anxiety level. And from reading, from walking in nature, from going to museums now, in between all of the work that I'm doing. So I highly recommend that because that will color your experience with your voice. And secondly, speaking about rhythm, I just wanted to make one more point. With childhood development, there's now research that will predict deficits and based on a child's ability to connect to rhythm. And rhythm, of course, as we know, or maybe we don't all know this, but it's the basis of language. So there's so many fascinating things to study. And lastly, Francis Collins himself very recently said to me, what we need are creative arts therapists. So this is music therapists, visual arts therapists, dance therapists, who also study neuroscience. So combining those fields for all of you who are in education and are interested in this can really move the needle forward and research, and we need great research. So there's real opportunity there if you're an artist and you want to use your art for good. Okay, so I didn't want to forget to say that.
Can I add to that point? I think it's a really important one because music teachers, artists have so much to offer. And there are various medical channels, but also, for example, I have working with people who have cochlear implants. And it seems that actually making music, if you have a hearing loss, is a way to strengthen your sound to meaning connections. And, a music teacher may not know about cochlear implants, but they know how to teach. They know how to break down sound to meaning connections and to bring people along so that they can strengthen their brain to hear better.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. There's a question by Heather, who is tuning in from Canada, and she's interested in how we can measure impact from an educational experiences based on neural arts. And I think what I want to say to start this off is that there is already a lot of research that has been done. And sometimes I think we tend to reinvent the wheel because these fields have been so siloed. And it's really important to be able to see what has already been studied. And there's quite a bit of work that's been done on looking at things that some of you may already know about, like capacity for mathematical skills in music, or language acquisition and rhythm, or even this idea of movement and learning, doodling and attention. There is a very large body of literature, but it doesn't get shared and it doesn't get translated. And that's one of the things that you'll be able to access soon with this resource center that I shared earlier, where you'll literally be able to go in and say, I'm looking for research around the role of music as an intervention for concussions for children ages 12 to 14. And if that work has been put onto this resource center and highly curated, you'll be able to easily find this knowledge. In terms of new research, And there's always the need for new research. Education is one of those fields where we know more and more about child development, and arts are leaving more and more from schools. It's so counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense. It's crazy that we're not bringing the arts back into the schools in mass. And it turns out that in California, Proposition 28, which is $1 billion a year to bring the arts back into the schools, and in the under-resourced communities, schools get more support, meaning educators that are either music teachers or arts teachers in other ways. And they're also going to be training classroom teachers how to understand this neurobiology of the arts and aesthetic experiences as well. And so this is a really great opportunity to start to look at both pre and post outcome measures. And I think we're at a place in looking at evaluation where it's not just filling the bubble in on the test, but what's happening with creativity? What's happening with collaboration? What about creative thinking? How are we feeling about social emotional development? Do children feel a sense of belonging? Do they feel like they have resiliency? The kinds of skills that we need for the future to solve the issues that we face are not about rote memory. And so I think we're at a place where we want to really think carefully about what we're evaluating for. From a technology point of view, we're now also at a point where there are mobile devices where we can measure particular types of biometrics in venue. So we can measure variable heart rate in classrooms. We can measure EEGs in classrooms. We can look at mobile devices that allow us to do things. And I think what I would caution is the question is, to what end? And I think we have to be really careful about what we're measuring, why we're measuring it, and why do we need it. And I think looking at starting by looking at the literature that's already there is a really important place to start, and to be able to create policy where we start to be able to have these art experiences in school and after school and in the communities that we're serving, beyond this, some people talk about this as clinic to community or community to clinic, but it's what is that continuum where these experiences are helping us prevent, preserve, protect, and also intervene when we need to intervene. So I think this continuum framework is also super important. And Nina, I think maybe you would have something to add there.
Yeah, let me amplify what you have said. There is so much information about the positive impact of music education on thinking, on music, on academic performance, on communication skills, on social development. There is there's a wealth of information. Not to say that we have so much more to learn, but we can't ignore. I mean, it's like there is no definitive study showing that eating a balanced diet is a good thing, or that being physically fit and flexible is good for your health. And yet anybody who really looks around knows that there are scads of study after study, small studies, and it's tons of converging evidence that bring a person to say, we already know a lot about what to eat and how to educate, and why music education is not a bigger part of the standard of care in medicine and in education and in our homes, and as we think about how we live our lives is kind of astounding. And yet, as you said with your books, people are hungry for this information, and because I think we all want to do the right thing.
Can I recommend the Sound Health Network? So those of you who are interested in connecting the dots and finding out what there is, and in the NeuroArts Resource Center is coming up, but the Sound Health Network exists already. It's based at UCSF. You can sign up to receive newsletters from them, but there are many workshops. People teach. They're teaching how to do research. it's for the general public as well. There's no barrier. It's for everyone to learn about. This is really focused on what Nina's saying. This is focused on what exists. I'm sure Nina's all over it, about music and health. And so I highly recommend that particular initiative.
And that initiative is a really beautiful collaboration between the National Endowment for the Arts, NIH, the Kennedy Center, and the Renée Fleming Foundation. And so you're seeing these strong interdisciplinary connections. And I think that's another thing I would like to lift up, is that this work is highly interdisciplinary. It isn't siloed into neuroscience only or cognitive science or music. It has to be interdisciplinary because it's so generative. And just to check off a couple of questions maybe together, we have been doing quite a bit, all of us in the field, and certainly the people on this call, to raise awareness at all of the academic conferences, the medical conferences. I've been involved with Society for Neuroscience, and I've done webinars. There's many opportunities where we're sharing this information, because I think awareness is the first step. And now we're moving into what I would like to think of as activation by sector. So how do you bring this to life in education, in healthcare, in public health? And so there's a lot of work happening in arts on prescription. There's a lot of work happening, I mentioned California, but in other states, to really bring the arts forward. The Secretary of Education is very supportive of this work, as is Health and Human Services, Vivek Murthy, as is Maria Rosario Jackson from NEA. And the White House in our country is also super supportive, and certainly because of the health benefits, but also because of the mental health benefits and this idea around loneliness and belonging. And I'll add, someone asked this question about how does a local community get involved? There are a number of initiatives around the country that are looking at hyper-local solutions, because the truth is that's where the action happens. That's really where we know each other. We know who the community artist is. We know the museums. We know the libraries. We know what's happening in cultural arts organizations in neighborhoods, or, the pop-up where somebody's a painter and bringing kids in to paint after school. We know their schools. And so there's a number of initiatives. One is called One Nation, One Project, where there are 18 cities that are lifting up a big art activity that brings the whole community together, including the municipalities. And that event is it's gonna culminate in the summer. With the Blueprint, there's something called the Community NeuroArts Coalitions, where we're working on a toolkit where communities can learn how to come together and really, through the lens of arts and aesthetic experiences, to solve and address some of the most intractable issues. Interestingly, Kansas City is one of those cities. And with what happened with the Super Bowl shooting, parade shooting, they're now pulling their artists together for trauma and for resiliency, because that really is so traumatizing, as it is everywhere. But they're an example of a city that we're working with to help move that forward. So this work is at all levels, I say bottom up, top down, sides in. It's really happening everywhere in this country, but also everywhere in the world. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
Definitely. And I think the social prescribing piece is something that we're seeing in other parts of the world. Certainly the World Health Organization is bringing tremendous research and disseminating quickly and creating a network very quickly, because it's only a year old, this initiative. They didn't have arts and health before. So I think that, but the social prescribing, somebody raised the art pharmacy in Atlanta. I'm going to be in Atlanta next month. And so I'm definitely going to look at that. So thank you so much for mentioning it. I also want to mention that in California, where they have all this money now for arts educators, there aren't enough arts educators. So if anybody is, and I suspect with the bad news that over the past 15 years that their music education has been taken out of schools, arts education in general, people are maybe not majoring in it anymore. But I think this whole initiative is going to create more jobs, more interest, and more of an imperative to bring the arts back into schools, along with other subjects that people love and want to do, whether it's languages or sports. So I would highly recommend that people look at that. And there's also a lot of interest. You undergraduates who want to do this, form clubs. form relationships with whatever higher learning institutions exist that have neuroscience or that have arts organizations, to try to encourage everyone to collaborate, because that's what's new. Susan, you talked about this really good, about this interdisciplinary collaboration and how we really need to kind of get on board with how this works.
Yeah. Nina, I'm going to throw a couple questions your way in the interest of time. The first one is, could you explain more about how the brain keyboard produces sound perceived by individuals? Let's understand some of the technical piece of that. And the second one is, what's your next step with children? We have someone who is researching infants and their caregivers using rhythm to promote attention and to help with self-regulation. And she'd love to understand more about that.
Yes. All right. Well, let me take the second question first, which is, what are we doing in children? I mean, the big project that we're working on, but we're looking for sponsors, really would like to scale up enormously, is the concussion work in children, and to really use rhythm to resynchronize the brain and to speed the recovery neurally, which we can measure, and also return to play, return to a classroom situation. So that's a big area. Also in language and language disorders, this is huge. The sound is at the center of many language disorders, and it's different aspects of sound processing that can be disrupted in autism or in a child who's having a literacy problem. And then, this is in older people often, but even, hearing loss hits anybody. And that's yet another area clinically. But it all gets to that first question, which is, how do we measure, how do we better understand the sound processing in the brain? So what is fascinating is that sound, even though it's invisible and we don't even often pay attention to it enough, has ingredients that are obvious, visually. I have this thing here, and you can see that it has a shape, a size, a color, a texture, and sound is full of ingredients like pitch and timing, timbre, phase, harmonics. And we can capture this, and it doesn't matter what the stimulus is. I mean, it can be speech, it can be music. So to create the brain keyboard, we can measure the brain's response to individual notes. And so then we have, say, from Renée, how is her, what kind of a response would we get from Renée to B flat, and to all of the notes on the keyboard. And once we are able to get those samples, we are able to put them into a keyboard format so that we can actually play the brain. We can play the brain back, so we can listen to it. And at the same time, just as I said, that the ingredients are pitch, timing, timbre, phase, loudness, we can analyze those, and we analyze them through a procedure called the frequency following response, the FFR. And I might as well mention that, so the FFR hosts there's an FFR workshop every 2 years on either side of the Atlantic. And last year was in Barcelona. This year, we are hosting the FFR workshop in Chicago in June. So maybe you can put up the link to that. But it's very tricky. This is complicated stuff. It's very tricky to measure sound processing in the brain, but we're getting better at it all the time, because we fortunately have these signals that we can work with to give us insight into the big questions like aesthetics and transcendence.
So Nina, I think we're at time. Just to kind of maybe try to come to some integration and some closure here. We're blown away by your questions. We didn't get to nearly as many as we would like to. And our organizers are saying we need a part 2 and part 3 of this conversation. I'll make a commitment to try to get the questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can and get them out to you in some form. But I want to just close by saying that someone had this beautiful question about what about the experience and the intuition? We don't want to take that out of what the arts are. And what I often say about that is that the sun shines on us and it makes us feel warm and comfortable, and it soothes our souls. And because we know how the sun works, we're able to unleash that energy for all kinds of things for humanity. And that's kind of how I feel about the arts. We don't want to take anything away from the magic of this and the intuitive. I mean, look, artists got there first. The artists have always intuitively known the power of healing and the power of the arts to make us human. They make us human. So I think that's a really important question, and something for us to reflect on. The second piece is that all are welcome. If you're a practicing artist, if you are a professional artist, if you are someone who just wants to doodle in this space and just be interested in it, if you're a researcher, if you're a student, you reach out through this group at Hopkins at Home, and we'll make sure that we try to address this. But this is the future. I can't underscore that enough. This is the future that humanity is meant to have, especially as technology is taking over the mundane. This is what makes us most human. And I think it's a very exciting time. So I want to thank Renée Fleming and Nina Kraus for your beautiful wisdom and insight and work. And we're looking forward to continuing the conversation.
I want to thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
So exciting.